Chapter 81 The Arenas of Hilfor. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Just how big is this city? Darkfire groaned in frustration, and Aaron felt much the same. They had already spent several hours exploring the city's seemingly endless streets, and yet, Aaron knew that they had barely seen a fraction of it. Let's find a decent inn first, Aaron said. After that, we can take our time exploring the city. They decided on an inn named the Golden Pig. Large and fairly clean, it was more expensive than most inns they had found so far, with a crowd of merchants instead of the mercenaries, caravan guards, and Shadowflame hopefuls that filled most inns. Unconcerned with cost, he already had enough gold to last a lifetime. Aaron got them the two largest rooms in the inn, then paid some more for clean bedsheets. After they settled in, they headed back down to the common room, where they approached the innkeeper. As soon as he spotted them, the man gave them an ingratiating smile, undoubtedly eager to see more of their coin. "Do you know where we can find the arena?" Aaron asked him. "You're hoping to get recruited?" The innkeeper's smile disappeared almost immediately, a look of mistrust replacing it. Apparently, he preferred merchants over fighters. "We are," Darkfire replied curtly. "So can you tell us?" "There's 4 arenas in the city," the man answered. "One in each of the northern, southern, eastern, and western quarters of the city. There's fights every day, as well as monthly tournaments." "Every day?" Aaron asked, surprised. Even for a city this large, having 4 arenas with daily fights seemed excessive. The innkeeper sighed. "There's no shortage of Shadowflame aspirants in Hillfort, nor gamblers to support them." "Any difference between the arenas?" Even if the innkeeper seemed annoyed with the subject, Aaron still hoped he could at least learn some useful information. "Nothing worth mentioning," the innkeeper replied. "You see one, you've seen them all." With that, the innkeeper turned and left to tend on some merchants who were sitting in the common room. Aaron could not help but be puzzled at the man's behavior. Even if he disliked fighters, one would expect he would at least like gold. Friendly fellow, that. Darkfire gave Aaron a smirk. "So you take north, and I take south. You want to split up? Not much point in fighting each other." The idea made sense. If each of them took an arena, they should be able to rack up wins easy enough, with little chance of being defeated. "All right," Aaron said. In a lower voice, he added, "Just remember to hold back a bit, we don't want to draw too much attention." They agreed to meet again later that night, then left immediately, both of them eager to test their skills against new opponents. Finding the northern arena took Aaron longer than he would have liked. Although the arena was supposed to be only an hour's walk from the inn, Hillfort's narrow streets made it almost impossible to find his way, and he had to ask for directions at least half a dozen times. When he eventually found the arena, he was amazed at its size. While the arena in Aramont had been little more than a glorified practice field, this one was large and imposing, with proper stone walls and rows of seats looking out over the fights. "Entries 1 copper, a man in a slightly shabby uniform said as soon as Aaron entered. "I'm here to fight," Aaron responded. "You?" Although the man gave him a skeptical look, he waved Aaron through. "Go to the back, they'll tell you what to do." As Aaron walked to the back of the arena, he threw a glance at the fight in progress, seeing a burly bald-headed man face a lanky youth. In a moment, Aaron could see the youth had little if any training, and he was defeated in just a few blows. Next, the announcer's voice called out, and as the youth left the arena, another fighter took his place, nervousness playing on the new fighter's face as he faced the burly man. Aaron turned his attention to the crowd, and saw that there were several hundreds of people, most of them intently watching the fights, with some occasionally shouting in encouragement or anger. Amid the crowd, several men and women walked, and after a moment, Aaron understood that they were taking bets. At once, the size of the crowd made sense. The people in the audience were there to gamble, not to watch any great display of skill. When he reached the back of the arena, Aaron found a doorway cut into the stone, and behind it was a large chamber in which several dozens of people stood waiting. He entered the chamber, and immediately, a tall man in a pristine uniform approached him. Here to fight. Aaron nodded. What's your name? Ghost Blade. Grab a sword from one of the barrels, then get in line, the man said, pointing toward a handful of barrels to the side of the chamber. Once you're called, you can fight until you lose. If you lose, get out of the arena, and move to the back of the line. Any questions? Aaron looked at the line of fighters, seeing that there were over 24 people in front of him. He sighed, then asked, any rules? No killing, and Shadowflame members aren't allowed to fight, the man said. Without bothering to ask if Aaron was a member of the Shadowflame Society, he turned his attention to the man behind Aaron. Here to fight. Aaron took a wooden sword, then lined up behind the others. The line moved slowly, and as he waited, he studied the other fighters. Most of them looked to be hapless youths, although a few had the bearings of experienced fighters. Finally, Aaron's turn came. When he stepped into the arena, he was surprised to see the burly man was still there. Apparently, the man was having a good day, at least so far. Seeing Aaron approach, the man gave him an indifferent glance, then attacked immediately, rushing forward with his weapon raised. A moment later, the man was on the ground, sporting several new bruises and a shocked expression. Next, the announcer's voice sounded, and as the burly man left the arena, a new opponent entered, a handsome young man with broad shoulders and an arrogant face. Next, the announcer yelled as the young man limped out of the arena, now sporting a black eye and a sulking expression. Next. Aaron fought for several hours, soon losing track of how many opponents he had faced. Most of them, he fought only once, although a few returned several times. The burly man he had faced first tried 5 times before finally giving up. With none of his opponents being body refiners or mages, Aaron never came even close to losing a fight, and he used only a fraction of his true strength. Still, the endless supply of opponents proved excellent practice, even if they were too weak to pose a real challenge. Testing his skills against them and facing their numerous different styles helped Aaron hone his swordsmanship. Night had fallen by the time Aaron finally decided he'd had enough for the day, and as he returned to the entry chamber he was surprised to see that there were now thousands of people in the crowd, many of them cheering loudly. So much for not drawing attention, he muttered to himself as he stepped back inside, hoping he hadn't caused too much of a stir. Chapter 82 The Victor's Spoils. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Aaron stepped back inside the waiting chamber, he was met with the gazes of several dozens of fighters. No longer engrossed in battle, he finally had time to wonder why so many people wanted to fight him. He'd defeated numerous opponents already, and it seemed unlikely that these newcomers would fare any better. You can't leave yet, one of them said, a young man with ruffled brown hair and a thin face. We haven't fought yet. Give it a rest, rookie, an older man said. It's not like you had a chance, anyway. I still could have learned something, the young man replied, looking dejected. Hearing those words, Aaron suddenly understood why opponents kept coming long after it was clear they had no chance of winning. Even if they knew they would lose, they likely thought they could improve their skills by fighting someone they believed to be a master swordsman. He could not help but feel slightly embarrassed at this. Although he was more skilled than most of the opponents he had faced, his true advantage lay in strength rather than skill, and the only thing others were likely to learn from fighting him was to stick with weaker opponents. You caused quite a stir, and in less than a day. When Aaron looked, he saw that the voice belonged to the uniformed man who had given him a cold welcome some hours ago. Although the man had hardly paid him any attention when he arrived, Aaron's string of victories seemed to have raised his interest. Dovco, just wait until you see me fight next time, Aaron said. Any chance of staying unnoticed already lost, he figured he might as well act the part of the arrogant young fighter. The uniformed man chuckled. You won't be fighting here again, he said. Not outside the tournaments, at least. What? Aaron was puzzled. Why not? The arenas run on gambling, the man replied. Fighters like you are bad for business. If the governor knew what you cost him today, he'd probably have a fit. He laughed at the last part. Then what about the tournaments? Aaron asked. I can still join those. Anyone with at least 10 wins can take part in the monthly tournaments, the man said. You've achieved that and then some, so you're free to join the next one, in about 2 weeks. A thoughtful expression on his face, he added, you should find more of a challenge there, too. Aaron nodded in understanding. I suppose I might give it a shot. Although he was in the city to be recruited by the Shadow Flame Society, he wouldn't mind the chance to test his skills against stronger opponents. Figuring there wasn't much point in waiting longer, he stepped out of the waiting chamber, ready to head back to the inn. Yet to his surprise, a noisy crowd immediately formed around him, with at least 100 people all trying to reach him. Thank you, a red-faced man with a joyous expression cried out, pressing something into Aaron's hands. The man disappeared back into the crowd before Aaron could respond, but when he looked at what the man had handed him, he saw that it was a bulging coin purse. Before he could see what was inside, someone else pushed a handful of coin into his hands. He looked up, and saw it was a tearful woman. You saved my family, she blurted out. As Aaron struggled to make his way through the crowd, people kept putting coin and other gifts in his hands and pockets. At first, he was confused by this strange turn of events, but then, he realized what was going on. All of these people were likely to be gamblers, and Aaron had just won over 100 fights in a row. With some amusement, he realized that anyone who had bet on him must have earned a fortune. He made his way through the crowd as best he could, keeping his hands on his void bags. He didn't care too much about the coin his new fans put in his pockets, he had more than he needed anyway, and if some got stolen, he wouldn't miss it. Finally, he stepped out of the arena and onto the street. Even here he was followed, over a dozen voices still sounding around him, some thanking him, others merely praising him, and yet others asking for favors. He ignored them all, hurriedly stepping into a side street to shake off the crowd. A few more quick turns, and he stood in a mostly empty street, where he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Yet before he even had a chance to catch his breath, he was approached by a young man in a black robe. You did well today, the young man said. I take it you're planning to be recruited into the Shadow Flame Society. Perhaps, Aaron said. But what business of yours is it? I'm Li Jing, the young man said. I'm a Shadow Flame novice, and after seeing your performance today, I would be happy to have you join me. Oh. Aaron said, immediately wary. That's a bit quick, isn't it? Li Jing shrugged. I figured I should move before someone else snatches you up. Talent like yours is rare, even here in Hillfort. I think I'll try my luck in the tournaments, first, Aaron said, suspicious of the quick invitation. I only just arrived in the city, and I want to see what my options are, first. You're holding out for the auction, then? Li Jing asked, a dejected look appearing on his face. The what? The young man gave him a puzzled look. The auction, he repeated, as if the words were self-explanatory. I have no idea what you're talking about, Aaron said. What auction? It seems you really are new here, Li Jing observed. Every month, the governor holds an auction where Shadow Flame novices get to bid on the strongest fighters in the city. You novices actually bid on fighters? Aaron asked, surprised. Not me, Li Jing replied. I don't have the wealth. But the richer novices bid on fighters, yes. But why? You're Shadow Flame novices, aren't you? What difference does a fighter make? From what Aaron understood, novices should be strong enough that having normal fighters on their side would make little difference in a fight. It's dangerous beyond the border, Li Jing said. Especially these last few years. Having some strong fighters on your side can make a difference, if you have enough of them. Even a short distraction can make a big difference in a fight, after all. So if I hold out for the auction, what can I expect to get? Although he had little interest in gold, Aaron figured that if novices were bidding on fighters, they would have more to offer than just a bit of coin. You. Not much, Li Jing said with a laugh. Only mages and body refiners are worth a lot. Aaron nodded absent-mindedly, thinking about this unexpected turn of events. He had expected that finding a novice to recruit him and Darkfire would require at least some effort, but instead, it seemed that they'd be able to not just get recruited, but make a profit as well. It's a bad idea, though, Li Jing said in a serious voice. Aaron looked back up, eyeing the novice. Why's that? Some members of the Shadow Flame Society believe outsiders shouldn't be allowed to join, Li Jing explained in a low voice, as if he was sharing a secret. Occasionally, they'll bid on strong fighters, only to have them disappear beyond the border. Members of the Shadowblood faction, you mean? You already know of them? Li Jing asked, his eyes wide in surprise. Someone warned me about them, Aaron replied, unwilling to reveal all he knew. Told me to stay far away from them. Then you know that joining me now would be in your best interest, Li Jing said. In the auction, you won't know who'll be bidding on you. And if you do well in the tournament, you might well draw dangerous attention. Still, I'm going to keep my options open, at least for now, Aaron said. He did not point out that he had no reason to trust the young novice in front of him any more than other Shadowflame novices. If you change your mind, you can find me at the Drunken Weasel, the young man said, although he didn't look hopeful. I'll be there for at least a few more days. I'll give it some thought, Aaron said. For now, thanks for the information. In truth, he had no intention of accepting the novice's offer. Friendly though the young man might be, the fact that he hadn't noticed Aaron was a body refiner meant he was either stupid or lying. With a nod to Li Jing, Aaron headed back to the inn, already curious to hear how things had gone for Darkfire. Chapter 83 An Unexpected Invitation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Although he had already traveled the route earlier that day, Aaron's return to the inn still took him some time. Navigating the city's many narrow streets proved even harder at night than it was during the day, and once more, he had to rely on directions from passers-by to find his way. When he finally arrived at the Golden Pig, it was already past midnight, and inside, he found the common room filled with a lively crowd of people in various stages of inebriation. Although it wasn't quite as rowdy as a common inn or tavern would be, it seemed even the respectable merchants at the Golden Pig weren't above enjoying a drink or three in the evening. At once, his eyes searched for Darkfire, and he found his friend in a corner of the common room, sitting behind a table with a large mug of ale and an annoyed expression. When Aaron approached him, he looked up, a wronged look on his face. They threw me out after just a few dozen fights, Darkfire said, sounding peeved. I barely even had time to get warmed up. Said I was bad for business. Can you believe that? Aaron chuckled. They won't let me fight anymore either, he said, although they waited until I was finished before they told me. They told you to wait for the tournaments, too? Darkfire asked. They did, Aaron replied with a nod. So, did any Shadowflame novices try to recruit you? 3, Darkfire said. After that, I made my way out of there. Looks like you're more popular than me, Aaron replied with a laugh. I only got one. Did they tell you about the auction? Darkfire gave him a blank look. What auction? There's a monthly auction the governor holds, where Shadowflame novices can bid on recruits. What? Darkfire looked baffled. Novices actually bid on recruits. But why? That's what I was wondering, Aaron said. I take it that sort of thing doesn't happen in Aramont. Darkfire shook his head. The closest I've heard was someone bribing a novice to recruit him. Didn't end well for either of them. But novices paying for recruits. That just doesn't make sense. Again, he shook his head, clearly dumbfounded by the idea. Maybe the 6th Valley is more dangerous than the 4th Valley. Aaron offered, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe, Darkfire said. But even then, what good would a few normal fighters do? They talked about the matter for some time, drinking ale while trying to find an explanation. Yet no matter how hard they tried, neither of them could come up with a good reason for novices to be so ardent in finding recruits. We'll just have to ask around tomorrow, Aaron finally said. Maybe someone in the city can tell us what's going on. They talked for a while longer before Aaron headed to bed, leaving Darkfire in the company of several young girls who had approached him as they sat talking. Whatever it was that drew women to Aaron's friend, it clearly worked just as well in Hillfort as it had in Aramont. Aaron awoke late in the morning after a long night of dreamless sleep. It seemed that the hours of fighting the previous day had tired him out more than he had thought. When he headed down to the common room to have breakfast, he was immediately approached by the innkeeper. "Young Master Ghostblade," the man said, bowing politely. "I have some news for you." Aaron's blinked in surprise at the man's sudden change in behavior. Just a day earlier, the innkeeper had treated him with thinly veiled disgust after learning he was a fighter looking to join the Shadowblade Society. Yet now, the innkeeper acted like he was a nobleman. "What is it?" Aaron asked, hiding his confusion. "This morning, I received some messages for you," the innkeeper said, handing Aaron a stack of letters. "Oh." Aaron replied. Immediately, he began opening the letters, and it didn't take him long to find that each of them contained an invitation, several from local merchants and nobles, but most from Shadowblade novices. From the looks of it, he and Darkfire had drawn even more attention than they thought. After working his way through the stack of letters, he looked up and was surprised to see that the innkeeper was still standing there. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "Young Master Ghostblade," the man began, "there is another one. An invitation to visit the Lord Governor this afternoon." With that, he handed Aaron a thick cream-white envelope. On the outside, the names Ghostblade and Darkfire were spelled in letters of golden ink. "You opened it?" Aaron asked with a frown. "Apologies, young master," the innkeeper said, his face turning red. I'm afraid my curiosity got the better of me," Aaron sighed, then turned his attention back to the letter. As he read it, he saw that the innkeeper had spoken the truth. The governor had invited him and Ghostblade to visit for a midday meal. "What time is it now?" he asked, feeling a tinge of worry. "About an hour to noon," the innkeeper said. Aaron cursed under his breath. "If you're going to open my letters, you could at least let me know when I'm late to see the damn governor," he said to the innkeeper. Without waiting for the man's response, he hurried up the stairs and headed to Darkfire's room, where he gave the door several loud knocks. "Wake up, you lazy bum." Several moments passed without an answer, and Aaron knocked on the door again. This time, he heard some stumbling noises come from the room, and a few seconds later the door opened, revealing a sleepy Darkfire with ruffled hair and a look on his face that suggested he had barely slept. When Aaron looked past him, he saw a young brown-haired woman lying in the bed, pretty and blushing, covering her naked body with a bed sheet. "Looks like at least one of us had a good night," he said, sighing loudly. "Time to get dressed. The governor has invited us for a midday meal." "What time is it?" Darkfire asked, lazily rubbing his eyes. "A good half hour after we should have left," Aaron replied. "Now get going." As Darkfire headed back inside to get dressed, Aaron headed for his own room. After hesitating for a moment, he put on Jiang Fei's robe, figuring she knew more about proper clothing than he did. He headed back down to the common room, where Darkfire appeared not much later, looking surprisingly well dressed for someone who had been asleep just moments earlier. "Who was the girl?" Aaron asked as they left the inn. "Just someone I met last night after you went to bed. You wouldn't believe the way she." As they hurried through the streets, Darkfire regaled Aaron with bawdy tales of his latest conquest, and several times Aaron could not help but gape in shock at the sordid stories. Once more, he was reminded of his own lack of experience with women. Unlike the arenas, the governor's palace was easy to find, there could be no mistaking the lone building atop the hill at the center of the city for anything else, and they arrived only a few minutes late. The sight of the palace caused Aaron to pause in wonder. It was surrounded by white walls that seemed to be made wholly from marble, and the building itself featured several large towers with ornate marble decorations that depicted armored warriors and fierce monsters. Before the gate stood over a dozen guards, each wearing an immaculate uniform that seemed to be garish to the point of impracticality, bedecked with silk and lace designs in a handful of bright colors. "Halt," one of them said sternly as Aaron and Darkfire approached. "What's your business here?" "I'm Ghostblade," Aaron said, trying his hardest not to laugh at the man's outfit. "We were invited by the governor." Chapter 84 Lunch with the Governor. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The guard looked at Aaron and Darkfire suspiciously. "You were invited by the governor?" he asked, some doubt in his voice. "We were," Darkfire said. "So are you going to let us in?" The guard didn't answer, instead whispering something to one of the other guards, who quickly entered the gate. Some moments passed in silence as Aaron and Darkfire waited. Finally, a man emerged from the gate. Dressed in a blue silk robe and with his black hair elegantly coiffed, he looked like a high-ranking official or noble. "Darkfire and Ghostblade?" he asked, a practiced smile on his face. "That's us," Aaron said curtly, slightly annoyed at the wait. "Excellent," the man replied with a nod. "I'm the governor's steward. Please follow me inside." He stepped inside the gate, Aaron and Darkfire following close behind him. Within the walls, they found a large garden filled with neatly trimmed hedges, several fountains, and numerous marble statues. With just a quick glance Aaron could see that all the statues seemed to depict unusually well-endowed nude women, and he instantly found himself wondering just what kind of man the governor was, to have his garden decorated like this. He had no chance to give the statues a closer look, however, because the steward hurriedly led them to the palace itself, which looked even more imposing up close than it had from a distance. The steward led them through the palace doors, passing several guards on the way. Once they entered, Aaron saw that the palace was even more lavish on the inside than on the outside. Elaborate murals decorated the walls, and he was stunned to see that the ceiling was covered in gold plating. Yet what really caught Aaron's eyes were the statues that stood on the side of the hallway. Carved from pristine white marble, they all depicted curvaceous women and couples in various states of undress, engaging in activities that could only be described as obscene. "What the hell is this place?" he whispered to Darkfire, who looked to be as astonished as he was. "I don't know, but I don't think that's even possible," Darkfire said, pointing at a statue that depicted a woman with curves so exaggerated it looked like she could topple over at any moment. "Please refrain from discussing these matters in the palace," the steward said. Then, in a lower tone, he added, "And yes, the governor's tastes are quite specific." "That's one way to put it," Aaron said, glancing at a statue that showed three women contorted in a position that was not just extremely lewd but also, he thought, physically impossible. The steward led them through several large hallways, each clearly decorated according to the governor's tastes. As Aaron passed the statues and paintings, he stared in amazement, several times only barely able to keep himself from gasping in shock. When they reached the dining hall, Aaron was relieved to see that it lacked the decorations that filled the rest of the palace. Had there been any statues like the ones in the hallways, he was certain he'd have choked on his food during the meal. As he looked around, he saw that the dining hall was filled with several dozens of people, spread across three long tables that were stacked with all sorts of food and drink. On a small dais at the far end of the dining hall sat a large man, dressed in flowing silk robes in a variety of bright colors, and Aaron immediately knew this would be the governor. The man was large in every sense of the word, tall and round-bellied, smacking his lips as he tore the meat of a roasted bird leg with his teeth. "My Lord Governor," the steward announced as they entered, "I bring you the fighters Ghostblade and Darkfire." "Ah, good. My final guests for the day are here." The governor tossed aside the bone he held, then wiped his hands on his clothes. Come, let me get a look at the two of you. Aaron and Darkfire walked toward him, the rest of the people in the hall turning their heads and eyeing them with some curiosity. Many of them looked to be fighters, although some seemed to be merchants or nobles, and a few looked like they could be Shadowflame novices. When they reached the dais upon which the governor sat, he regarded them with an appraising eye, as if they were a pair of prize horses and he was a merchant considering a purchase. Finally, he nodded in approval. Good, good, he said. The two of you will do well in the next auction. Now sit down, and eat. Aaron exchanged a look with Darkfire, who seemed as unimpressed with the governor as Aaron was. Still, there was no point in causing trouble, so they gave the governor short bows, then found seats at the tables. There were few empty seats, and Aaron ended up at a different table than Darkfire, next to a young woman he suspected was a Shadowflame novice. When he sat down, she gave him a curious glance. I take it you and your friend are the ones who caused the big stir yesterday, she asked, a smile on her lips. I suppose, Aaron said. Though we just had a few small sparring matches. No need for false modesty, she replied, an amused glint in her eyes. You are obviously skilled, but I think you will find that the tournaments offer much more of a challenge. Aaron was about to ask about the tournaments when suddenly, the doors to the dining hall opened and the steward once more stepped inside. My Lord Governor, the man called out. The young lady Tyrande has arrived. My beautiful daughter, the governor spoke loudly. So good of you to join us. Aaron turned toward the entrance, curious to see what the governor's daughter would look like. He hoped for the girl's sake that she hadn't inherited her father's looks. To his surprise, he immediately recognized her. It was none other than the girl he had seen that morning in Darkfire's room, although now, she was wearing a dress rather than a bed sheet. At once, he looked over to Darkfire. Seeing his friend red-faced and wide-eyed, staring at the girl in utter shock, he nearly choked trying to contain his laughter. Chapter 85 Amaya, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Is something funny? The young woman next to Aaron asked, giving him a questioning look. Aaron coughed several times, only partly succeeding in stifling his laughter. My friend may have done something stupid, he said, his attention focused on the governor's daughter as she entered the dining hall. Now that he got a better look at her, he saw that she was really quite beautiful. Her flowing brown hair framed a well-proportioned face, and her dark eyes were large and alert. When she noticed Darkfire, her eyes lit up, and she immediately approached him, seemingly unconcerned with what the others in the hall would think. As she reached Darkfire, she cast a glance at the man who was sitting next to him, a wealthy merchant, judging from his elegant robe and slightly pudgy physique. Move, she said in an unexpectedly firm tone that caused some looks of surprise among the other guests in the dining hall. The man looked up at her with a startled expression, obviously unsure of what to do. Move, she repeated. When the man didn't move, she gave him an annoyed glare, then added, now. The merchant looked at the governor, seemingly hoping for some sort of help with the situation. What are you waiting for? The governor said in a commanding voice. My daughter told you to move. At this, the merchant hurriedly stood up and made his way to a different seat toward the back of the room, an unhappy expression on his face. The governor's daughter smiled at her father, then sat down next to Darkfire. To Aaron's astonishment, she leaned over, then gave Darkfire a short kiss on his cheek. At once, Aaron looked over to the governor, fearful of what would happen next. Yet to his surprise, the man merely nodded, then went back to eating. The governor is many things, the young woman next to Aaron said in a low tone, but a hypocrite, he is not. When he turned to her, he saw that she had a smile on her face. Aaron sighed in relief, understanding that he and Darkfire wouldn't have to fight their way out of the palace. Amused though he had been by Darkfire's predicament, he had also felt some worry at what the governor's reaction would be. Yet from the look of things, there would be no trouble, at least not today. Reassured, Aaron turned his attention to the young woman next to him, hoping she could answer some of the questions he had about Hillfort. You're a Shadowflame novice, right? He asked, unwilling to bother with subtlety. Well. Noticed, she replied. Have you met any of us before? A few, he said. I was wondering if you could answer some questions for me. That depends on what those questions are, she said, a twinkle in her eye. But first, perhaps we should introduce ourselves. I'm Ghostblade, he said. Just Ghostblade, she asked, smirking. You don't have a real name. The question took Aaron by surprise. This was the first time someone had asked for his real name in a long time, and although he had little love for his nickname, there was something uncomfortably intrusive about the question. It's Aaron, he said after a moment's hesitation. No family name. A pleasure to meet you, Aaron, she said. I'm Amaya Tyr. Call me Amaya. The bright smile she gave him made him forget his questions, but only for a moment. Pretty though she was, with her long dark brown hair, olive skin, and dark eyes, what mattered to him now was learning more about his prospects in the Sixth Valley. Why do the novices here place so much value on fighters? He asked, starting with the most obvious question. You don't know about the current situation? She asked with a puzzled expression. I only arrived yesterday, Aaron said truthfully. I haven't had time to ask around yet. She gave him a thoughtful look. Then you may have unknowingly stepped into a hornet's nest. So what's going on? He asked. Not one for subtlety, are you? She laughed as she spoke. Very well. A little over a decade ago, the patriarch of the Sixth Valley fell ill. Since then, several factions have formed around the main contenders to be his successor. Aaron frowned. But what does that have to do with the recruits? He asked. He could not imagine recruits having any influence on the selection of a new patriarch. Recruits are future initiates, she replied. And some will become novices, or rise even higher. The more of them a faction can bring in, the stronger that faction will be when the time comes to choose a successor. The factions are trying to boost their numbers. Aaron thought he was beginning to understand what was happening, although it still didn't explain why novices would go so far as to bid on fighters in an auction. Amaya hesitated for a moment before speaking. In the beginning, novices would just take in more recruits, dozens, or in some cases even hundreds. But after the first few years, some of the less scrupulous factions decided that reducing the numbers of their opponents was as good as increasing their own. Reducing the numbers? Aaron asked in disbelief, both at the idea and at her discussing it so openly. Killing them, Amaya said bluntly. Beyond the border, the society does little to protect novices and their recruits, especially when their enemies are society members themselves, with enough support to shield them from repercussions. Noel.n, so it's a war, Aaron concluded. It's a war in all but name, Amaya agreed. Once you step beyond the border, there are constant battles between the novices, along with their recruits. The strongest recruits serve as commanders, while the weaker ones are little more than soldiers. Do others get involved in these battles? Aaron asked. Novices and recruits he could handle, but anything stronger than that would be a real problem. Adepts and masters. It hasn't gotten to that point just yet, she said. Having novices and recruits fight each other is one thing, but having the society's stronger members interfere. That's something different altogether. She hesitated, then added, although the way things are now, even that might not be far off. Why are you telling me all of this? Aaron looked at Amaya with some suspicion, unsure of both her motives and the truth of her words. If she was speaking the truth, these hardly seemed the kind of things the Shadowflame Society would want discussed in the open. Because you asked, of course, she said. Then, with a resigned sigh, she added, and it's nothing you wouldn't find out after staying in Hillfort for a week. But perhaps at the auction, you'll be swayed by my kindness, if you prove to be worth something. I suppose I'll have to win the tournament to prove myself. Of course, Amaya replied with a playful smile. If you can't even do that, you're useless. But if you do. I have several hundreds of recruits that still need a good commander. Aaron was about to respond when he noticed that the other people in the dining hall were beginning to stand up. As he looked around, he saw that the steward had once more entered the dining hall. "Honored guests," the steward said, his voice as practiced as his smile. "Today's entertainment is at an end. The governor thanks you for your company, and bids you farewell." Hearing those words, Aaron stood up as well, following the other guests' example in bowing to the governor. The first guests were already beginning to leave, and Aaron was about to follow behind them when the governor's loud voice sounded through the dining hall. "Dark Fire," the governor called out. "You and your companion are welcome to stay longer, if you would like." Although the words sounded like an offer, the man's voice sounded like a command, and Aaron realized he had little choice but to stay. He cast a frustrated look toward Amaya as she left the dining hall, realizing that his other questions would have to wait. "Young Master Ghostblade," a voice sounded. When Aaron turned around, he saw that the steward had appeared next to him. "Please follow me." Chapter 86 Searching for Answers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the days following his meal with the governor, Aaron saw little of Dark Fire. The steward had given Aaron a room in the guest quarters that stunned him both with its luxury and with its decorations, but after that, the man hadn't shown himself again, leaving Aaron to his own devices. While he understood that he had only been invited as a courtesy to Dark Fire, Aaron was still taken aback by how little his presence mattered here. He had a room and was allowed to attend the governor's meals, but other than that, nobody even seemed to notice he was there. The first few days, he dutifully attended all the meals, hoping that he would unearth more information about what was happening beyond the border. Yet Amaya did not make a second appearance, and the other guests proved far less talkative. After 2 days, he decided to skip both the meals and the company that came with it, instead using his time to practice body refinement, and eating the natural treasures Lord Jiang and Pan-Urge had left him. Dark Fire, meanwhile, appeared to spend every waking moment with the governor's daughter. Once, Aaron encountered him in the palace halls, early in the morning. He looked weary, and there were dark rings around his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Are you all right?" Aaron asked, somewhat worried at his friend's appearance. "It's that woman," Dark Fire said, suppressing a yawn. "She keeps me up all day and night. Not that I'm complaining, but..." He shook his head. "You're a body refiner," Aaron pointed out. "How can a single girl tire you out this much?" Dark Fire merely threw up his hands, either unable or unwilling to answer the question. Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of the governor's daughter, who greeted Aaron with a short but friendly smile. Without saying a word, she took Darkfire's hand, then led him away. As they departed, Aaron could hear her voice as she began to talk to Darkfire. "We're meeting Lady Wu for lunch today, and I want you to wear." Understanding that it would be a while before Darkfire would be of use again, Aaron decided to go into the city, to find answers to his questions about the Shadowflame Society. Leaving the palace wasn't an issue, the guard simply waved him through, apparently already aware of his status as a guest. After that, he decided that the best way to find answers would be by scouring the city's inns for information. There were nearly as many fighters in the city as there were locals, and with a few drinks to loosen their tongues, at least some of them should be able to tell him more about the situation. Yet although Amaya had made it seem like information would be easy to find, Aaron discovered it was more difficult than he anticipated. While rumors abounded in Hillfort, he soon found that most of them contradicted each other, and precious few seemed to have even the slightest shred of truth to them. The Sixth Valley Patriarch has died, and now his sons are fighting to succeed him, a fat man with a ruddy face told him in between 2 swigs of brandy. There's a new king across the border, and the Shadowflame Society is recruiting soldiers to defeat him, another said confidently. With a knowing smile, he added, when he attacks, the Patriarch will come out of hiding and wipe out his army. Yet another had a completely different reading of the events. The novices are planning to overthrow the Patriarch, he explained in a low voice. That's why they're recruiting so much. Got the governor on their side, 2, one of the novices is going to marry his daughter. After spending several days hearing a multitude of rumors, each even wilder than the last, Aaron gave up on the idea of trying to unearth information from the endless rumors. Perhaps there were some slivers of truth in some of the stories, but even so, to Aaron, it felt like trying to find pearls in a manure pit. Giving the matter some thought, he finally decided to find the Shadowflame novice who had approached him after his fights in the arena. The young man should be staying in the Drunken Weasel, and even if he did not seem particularly smart, his information could hardly be worse than what Aaron had found so far. The Drunken Weasel turned out to be less unsavory than its name suggested. Although it certainly was less luxurious than the Golden Pig, not to mention the governor's palace, it was mostly filled with small merchants and the like, rather than the mercenaries and drunks Aaron had expected. He found the Shadowflame novice in the common room, sitting in a corner with a large mug of ale and a forlorn look on his face. As soon as the young man saw Aaron, his eyes lit up in surprise. "You've decided to join me after all?" the novice asked, not fully managing to hide his excitement. "Perhaps," Aaron lied. "But first, I need some questions answered." "Of course," the young man said. "Let me buy you a mug of ale, and I'll tell you whatever you need to know." A short while later, they sat down at a table in the back of the common room, the novice eagerly listening to what Aaron had to say. "What do you know about the factions within the Sixth Valley?" Aaron asked, deciding not to waste time on small talk. "You know about that?" The novice gave him a startled look, then shook his head. "Of course you do. The Sixth Valley doesn't have many secrets, these days. So can you tell me anything?" Aaron asked. "Not much," the young man said. "I only recently became a novice." He furrowed his brow in thought, then said, "All I know is that there's some people who might succeed the patriarch, legendary figures all of them, and the most powerful families and factions are throwing their support behind different ones. And they're massing recruits to increase their influence." Aaron asked, remembering what Amaya had told him. The novice shrugged. "I suppose. Either way, I'm staying far away from it all. When I cross the border in a few weeks, I'm going to sneak right past the fighting and travel to the edge of the border region. It's safer there. Better than facing the other novices," the young man said. "There's plenty of dangers beyond the border, but the other novices." He lowered his voice, then cast a furtive glance around before continuing. "I hear one of them has recruited an entire army." "An entire army?" Aaron frowned. If a novice had really gathered an army, surely there should be some sign of it. "Then where are the soldiers?" he asked, some doubt in his mind. The novice gave him an uneasy look. "A few miles north of the city." "But the one who recruited them?" "It's best to stay far away from him." "Why's that?" Aaron asked, already wondering if he should go take a look for himself. "Bvec, he calls himself Lord Stoneheart," the novice said. "He's a member of one of the most influential families in the Sixth Valley, and he's terrifyingly strong. But the worst part is his temper. It is said even his own family fears him." A novice calling himself Lord. Aaron gave the young man in front of him a questioning look. "And nobody's tried to beat some sense into him?" The novice paled at the words. "Don't talk like that," he said in a low voice. "If Stoneheart heard about it." Aaron frowned, then decided to change the topic. Even if there was little chance of this so-called Lord Stoneheart overhearing them, the novice in front of him seemed terrified. "There's something else I was wondering," Aaron said. "I've seen mages before, but somehow, Shadowflame novices seem far stronger than novices should be. I was wondering if—" "I can't tell you," the novice interrupted him, sounding so resolute it surprised Aaron. "Some society secrets cannot be told. But of course, if you join me, after you become a Shadowflame member." "Thanks for your help," Aaron said, unwilling to give the novice any more false hope. "You're not going to join me, then?" the novice asked. Aaron shook his head. "I just needed some information," he said. With a thought, he produced one of Panurge's bottles of wine, and handed it to the novice. "For your troubles," he said. "Just make sure to drink it slowly. It's filled with natural essence." The young man's eyes went wide in an instant. "Then you're a body refiner," Aaron confirmed. "Don't tell anyone." With that, he made his way outside. As he stepped out of the inn, he hesitated about what to do next, but only for a second. If there was an army just a few miles outside the city, he had to go take a look. Chapter 87 Stoneheart's Army. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Just getting out of the city took Aaron frustratingly long, with the crowded and narrow streets making it slow and difficult to find his way. Yet after a time, the streets got less busy and the houses grew sparser, and finally, he found himself outside the city. Here, the roads were much quieter than the streets had been, though there was still a good bit of traffic, with farmers and merchants bringing goods to and from the city. As Aaron made his way north, he relaxed a bit, enjoying the sunny countryside while thinking about the weeks that lay ahead. From what he had heard these past few days, he now understood that the situation in the Sixth Valley was far more complicated than he had expected. With several factions fighting for power, choosing the wrong novice to join could be disastrous, deadly even. Yet so far, Aaron had only seen a handful of Shadowflame novices in Hillfort, and of those, he had only spoken to 2. If he was going to make the right choice, he would have to step up his efforts in finding information, and he would have to do it before the tournament. The tournament itself, meanwhile, provided as much danger as it did opportunity. Aaron had little doubt about his ability to do well in the tournament, but doing so would inevitably draw attention, and not necessarily the good kind. If he was lucky, a good performance in the tournament could draw the attention of the more powerful novices, perhaps giving him and Darkfire a strong ally when they crossed the border. But at the same time, he understood all too well that showing too much power during the tournament would turn him into a target for the enemies of whichever novice he chose to join. And then there was the auction. Aaron's void bags weren't quite as full as they had once been, but he had little interest in what he could gain from the auction. Whatever it was the novices could offer for a fighter, even a strong one, could hardly be worth much to him. Still, the auction was probably the best chance he had to get a look at the novices he would be up against across the border, and for that reason alone, he would watch, even if he did not take part. He sighed deeply, understanding that he had much to do and little time. Yet worrying now would do him little good, and he decided to focus his attention on the matter at hand. And after that, when he knew the truth about Stoneheart's supposed army, he would try and find out more about the other novices in Hillfort. He walked for over an hour, but finally, about half a dozen miles from the city's northern edge, he saw what looked to be a small band of mercenaries on the road ahead of him. These, he thought, must be some of Stoneheart's recruits. He quickened his pace to catch up, but when he approached them, he saw that up close, they more resembled farmers dressed up as mercenaries than they did actual mercenaries. What little armor they wore was old and ill-fitting, and the swords at their sides did not seem to be in much better shape. Worse, among the 20 or so men and women in the group, there wasn't a single one who didn't look either several years too young to fight or several decades too old. "You there," he called out. Several of the people in the group turned their heads toward Aaron, and a moment later the group came to a stop. "What is it?" one of the men asked. He was thin and gray-haired, and looked to be on the wrong side of 60 by at least a decade. "Do you know where I can find Stoneheart?" Aaron asked. "We're on our way to join Lord Stoneheart now," the man said. "You're looking to join, too?" "Maybe," Aaron replied. He took another look at the group, then asked, "Why do you want to join him?" "Gold, of course," the man answered with a cheerful laugh. "A week or 2 ago, one of his men came to our village. Said Lord Stoneheart will pay anyone who can lift a sword 5 gold just to join up, and another 5 after serving for a year." Hearing this, Aaron frowned. "You're joining for gold?" "Of course," the man said. "Just 5 gold pieces'll buy you a farm, and a good one at that, not much use for gold if you're dead," Aaron pointed out. The man chuckled in response. We're farmers, lad. We're used to dealing with bandits. If you join Stoneheart, you'll be dead farmers, Aaron replied. Without waiting for the gray-haired man's response, he turned toward the largest man in the group. Middle-aged and with dark hair that only showed a few streaks of gray, this man stood at least half a head taller than Aaron, and his shoulders carried the muscle of decades of farm work. You. Aaron said. Draw your sword. What? The tall man looked at Aaron with a confused expression, seeming unsure of what to do. Draw your sword, Aaron repeated, and strike me. I'll give you 10 gold right now if you draw even a single drop of blood. The man drew his sword, but he still hesitated for several seconds. After a few moments, he finally swung a half-hearted blow at Aaron. Aaron slapped the blade away with his hand before it could touch him. Again, he said. And make it a real strike. Once more the man struck, and this time, he put some effort into the blow. Aaron slapped the blade away effortlessly, and now, some gasps sounded within the group of farmers. Again. Emboldened by his previous 2 blows, the man finally stopped holding back and struck out with all his might in a heavy 2-handed blow. Aaron caught the blade mid-strike with his hand, stopping it dead in the air. Then, holding the blade in his hand, he effortlessly ripped the sword from the tall man's hands and tossed it aside. Beyond the border, you will face enemies far stronger than me, he said in a soft voice. If you go, you will die. The gray-haired man looked at Aaron with a fearful expression, but still, neither he nor the other farmers appeared like they were about to heed Aaron's advice. But the gold, the man began. Aaron reached for his void bag and took out a handful of gold. Without looking at it, he threw it on the ground. Take that, and go back to your farms, he said. Or join Stoneheart, and see how much good gold will do you in the grave. He waited no further, ignoring the group of farmers as he continued along the road. He had done all he could, and then some. Whether they continued on their foolish path was their own decision. As he walked, he found himself cursing in anger at Stoneheart for recruiting people who could barely defend themselves, and anger at the farmers for being so willing to throw away their lives. He arrived at Stoneheart's camp a little over half an hour later, and although his anger had subsided somewhat by then, after just some minutes in the camp his jaw once more stiffened as he looked around in disgust. The camp was large and crowded, holding hundreds if not thousands of tents, with throngs of people slowly moving between them. Some of the people here looked to be mercenaries or other fighters, but the vast majority were clearly like the farmers Aaron had met along the way, untrained, ill-equipped, and wholly unprepared for whatever they would face if they crossed the border. Aaron spent some time looking around, and as he did, his mood grew darker and his heart heavier. Several of the youths in the crowd seemed like they had barely even reached their teens, and for every well-equipped mercenary in the masses there were at least a dozen farmers who would be more comfortable holding a rake or sickle than a sword. Where's your badge? A voice suddenly sounded, interrupting Aaron's thoughts. My what? Aaron looked at the man in front of him, and saw that it was likely a mercenary or soldier, wearing armor and seeming comfortable with the sword at his side. Aaron figured him for one of the few people in the camp who had actually been in battle before. Your badge, the man repeated. Have you gone through recruitment yet? Aaron shook his head. I just arrived, he said with a noncommittal shrug. The man let out a frustrated sigh. You gotta get a badge before you can find a tent, he said. Come along and I'll get you sorted. As the man made his way through the camp, Aaron followed silently behind him. Chapter 88 Stone. Here you are listening at novelfull.audio. Wait in line until it's your turn, the mercenary said. They'll give you a badge once you're sorted. Without waiting for an answer he left, seeming glad to be rid of Aaron. Aaron looked at the man as he walked off, then shifted his attention to the line in front of him. From what he could tell, there were at least 100 people ahead of him, waiting before a tent the size of a small house. Briefly, he considered leaving right then. Yet although he now knew that Stoneheart's army was real, he had only gotten a short look at the camp, and he hadn't learned even a single thing about Stoneheart himself. He sighed in annoyance, then got in line. Perhaps the recruiters would be willing to tell him more about the army and its leader. As he waited, he studied the people who were waiting with him. Most seemed to be farmers and villagers, much like the people he had grown up with in Riverbend. Just from looking at them, he knew that few would know anything about mages beyond tall tales told at the village tavern. Once more, he felt anger rising within him. With just a few gold, these men and women were being lured into making a choice that they had no way of understanding, and that would likely cost them their lives. Yet angry though he was, right now, there was little he could do about it. So instead, he waited impatiently for his turn to be let into the large tent. The wait was shorter than he had feared, and a little over half an hour later he stepped inside. The interior of the tent was sparse but spacious, and at its center stood a table with a man and a woman sitting behind it, both bearing scars that suggested they had survived more than just a few battles. "Name," the woman said in a weary voice, not even bothering to raise her eyes from the papers in front of her. "Ghostblade," Aaron answered. Hearing the name, she looked up immediately. "You're a fighter." Aaron nodded. "Then we'll have to test you," she said. "If you're skilled enough, you can get double pay. More, if you're good." "I don't think that will be necessary," a voice sounded from the back of the tent. A moment later, a large figure emerged from the shadows. As the figure stepped into the light, Aaron could see it was a giant of a man. 7 feet tall if not more, he had shoulders like boulders and a bulldog-like neck. His dark hair was cut short, and a black beard adorned his angular face. Aaron realized this had to be Stoneheart, and at once, any idle thoughts he had of saving the recruits by killing the man disappeared. Although Stoneheart was at least a head taller than Aaron and so thickly muscled he could have passed for a bear, that wasn't what worried Aaron. Rather, it was the way he moved, smooth and controlled, yet with power exuding from even his smallest gestures. At once, Aaron knew that Stoneheart was a hideously strong body refiner. Definitely more powerful than Darkfire, and most likely stronger than Aaron, too. That alone would make him a foe worthy of respect, but from the Shadowflame novices Aaron had encountered previously, he knew that Stoneheart's control of magic would easily exceed his own. He held back a sigh, understanding that he was outmatched. In a fair fight, he would have little chance of surviving against Stoneheart, much less defeating him. Luckily, however, it seemed the man currently had little interest in fighting Aaron. "I've been expecting you," the giant said in an unexpectedly friendly voice. "Stoneheart?" Aaron asked, just to be sure. "It's Lord Stone," the woman began to correct him, but Stoneheart silenced her with a sharp gesture. "Friends can call me Stoneheart," he said, causing the woman to cast a curious look at Aaron. Stoneheart reached out to Aaron. "Come, take a walk with me. There are things we should discuss." Aaron was puzzled by this turn of events, but given the situation, there was little he could do but follow Stoneheart out of the tent. "I take it you aren't here to join my army," Stoneheart said as they exited the tent. "I was having a look," Aaron replied. "When someone told me a novice was gathering an army, I couldn't help but be curious." "You shouldn't trust her," Stoneheart said. "Pretty though her lips may be, every other word they produce is a lie." "Her?" Aaron asked, confused. The novice who had told him about Stoneheart wasn't female, nor did Aaron think he had particularly pretty lips. "I know she talked to you at one of the governor's gatherings," Stoneheart said. "But whatever she said about me, you can assume it to be little more than half-truths and whole lies." Aaron remained silent. Amaya had not so much as mentioned Stoneheart when they met, but it seemed Stoneheart believed otherwise. "Now that I've seen you myself, I can see why she approached you," Stoneheart continued. "I wondered why she would be interested in someone just for winning a few rounds in the arena, but finding this strong a body refiner is rare, even in Hillfort." Aaron understood that just like he had immediately recognized Stoneheart as a powerful body refiner, Stoneheart had no trouble recognizing Aaron's strength either. Rare enough that you resort to recruiting farmers, instead? Aaron asked, turning his gaze at the camp. You don't approve? Stoneheart asked, some curiosity in his eyes. Look at them, Aaron said. They're too weak to be of any use in a fight. Leading them across the border is like sending children into battle. Many of them will die, Stoneheart agreed. But for a worthy cause. Deciding who the next patriarch will be is worth so many lives. Stoneheart sighed, then shook his head. It seems there's much she failed to tell you. Like what? You didn't think the elders of the Sixth Valley would allow such numbers of recruits to join just for some squabbles over the patriarch's successor, did you? There was a hint of mockery in Stoneheart's tone, as if the very idea was ridiculous. Aaron frowned. Up until now, that was exactly what he had thought. What's the real reason, then? Stoneheart's expression grew serious. War is coming, he said. The lands beyond the border have always been dangerous, but there always was a certain order to the violence. Warlords rose and fell, but none dared challenge the empire. Yet in the past decades, the region has grown restless and chaotic, and new powers are arising that threaten the border itself. Aaron took some moments to consider Stoneheart's words. If they were true, joining the Shadowflame Society might be even more dangerous than he had expected. How do the recruits fit into all of this, he finally asked. The current struggles cull the weak, leaving the strong to join the society, Stoneheart answered. Many of those who survive will never make it beyond the initiate stage, but even so, their sheer numbers will strengthen the society. And that's worth the lives of the others. Although Stoneheart's explanation made sense, Aaron was far from convinced. If the border falls, far more than just them will die, Stoneheart replied. To this, Aaron had no answer. If what Stoneheart said was true, something he was by no means certain of, then the matter was more complicated than he had thought. Even if his opinion wasn't exactly swayed, he realized with some frustration that he simply knew too little about the situation to cast judgment. But you can worry about those things later, Stoneheart said. For now, your attention should be on the tournament. With your strength, you should do well, but there will be more competition than you might expect. Aaron left a short while later, politely rejecting Stoneheart's offer to spend the night at the camp. He had learned all he could about Stoneheart and his army, and in the morning, he would start searching for other novices, to see what they would tell him. It was well into the evening when Aaron reached the city, and close to midnight by the time he reached the governor's palace. He had only barely returned to his room in the guest quarters when he heard a knock on the door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see the governor's steward. Young Master Ghostblade, the man said, polite as always. I received a letter for you. Chapter 89 Zahava. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Aaron read the letter in his hands, then tossed it aside. It held an invitation from a novice named Zahava, but it contained no time or other details, just mentioning the name and an address. Although Aaron thought he could probably afford to ignore it, there was little point in offending a novice he didn't yet know. He would pay the novice a visit the next morning, he decided. After he got into bed, it took him some time to fall asleep, and as he lay awake, he thought about his forbidden realm. Well over 2 years had passed since Master Zhao had sealed it, and still, the seal remained in place. Partly, this was a testament to Master Zhao's extraordinary skill. Although the lesser seals on Aaron's wind and fire realms had been torn away when Aaron took 10 realm-opening pills at once, the seal on Aaron's forbidden realm remained as strong as the day it was created. Yet the greater part of the story was that Aaron had been lazy in trying to open it. During the past 2 years, his attention had been focused almost entirely on body refinement and spells using wind and force essence. What little time he had spent on shadow seals, he had spent learning to form lesser seals. That he had all but ignored the seal on his forbidden realm was not just due to laziness, however. Perhaps more importantly, he was glad just to be rid of it, and as long as the seal remained in place, it was easy to pretend that the realm simply did not exist. Yet it did exist, and even if he would rather dismiss it, neither the danger or the power it held could be ignored. Whatever power the Forbidden Realm held, he was currently unable to touch or even study, and if the seal somehow failed, he had no way to restore it, not without learning how it worked, first. Decision made, he began to study the seal. Once more, he found himself awed by the thousands upon thousands of strands of shadow essence from which the seal had been crafted, woven together in a pattern so intricate that just trying to study it left him lightheaded. He continued regardless, knowing that this was just the first step in a journey that could take years. Perhaps if he spent all his time studying the seal it could be undone faster, but he simply did not have that luxury. Instead, he would have to use what little free time he had to work on the seal, and he would have to do so without neglecting his training. Just the thought of it filled him with weariness. Forcing himself to continue, he spent some hours studying the seal, carefully analyzing the ways in which it resembled and differed from the lesser seals he already knew. It was tiring work, and at some point during the night, sleep overtook him even as he studied. The sleep that followed was troubled, filled with dreams of shadows twisted in impossible patterns. When he awoke, much of the morning had already passed, yet he felt little more rested than he had the previous night. After a quick breakfast, the first thing he tried to do was find Darkfire. With the tournament only days away there was much they needed to discuss, but ever since they had arrived at the governor's palace, Darkfire had barely shown his face. He asked one of the governor's servants where Darkfire was, and was unsurprised to hear that Darkfire had gone out to some social function with the governor's daughter. Briefly, he considered waiting until his friend returned, but he soon decided he had neither the time nor the patience for that. Instead, he would visit the novice who had invited him. He would have to go sooner or later, and perhaps he would be able to glean some new information. He left the palace without delay, asking the guards for directions to the address that had been in the letter. To his relief, it wasn't far, barely half an hour's walk from the palace. The address in the letter was in one of the wealthier areas of the city, but when he found it, he saw that the mansion itself was neither lavish nor excessively large. Built out of bare stone and 3 stories high, it looked sturdy and sober, seemingly built with little care for appearances. He knocked on the large wooden door, and it opened a moment later, revealing a broad-shouldered man with several facial scars, short hair, and a sword at his side. The man did not speak. Instead, he merely looked at Aaron, indifferently waiting for the visitor to introduce himself. "I was invited," Aaron said. "By a novice named Zaheva." The man nodded. "Come," he said. Aaron entered the doorway, following behind the scarred man. As he looked around, he saw that the interior of the mansion was much the same as the exterior, sober and functional, without even the slightest bit of decoration. It resembled a barracks more than a mansion, he thought. The man led Aaron through several hallways, and he saw that there were more people inside, a few dozen, at least, all of them with the appearance of battle-hardened soldiers and mercenaries. Finally, they arrived at a closed wooden door. The scarred man opened the door without knocking, then turned to Aaron and said, "Enter." Aaron did as the man said, and beyond the doorway, he found a large but bare room. On the side of the room stood a plain bed, and in the corner were several wooden chairs, stood around a small table. In one of the chairs sat a young woman, thumbing through some notes with a bored expression. She had tanned skin and long golden hair, and although she was sitting down, Aaron could see that she was probably at least as tall as he was. As Aaron entered the room, she looked up. "Ghost Blade?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Aaron nodded. "And you must be Zaheva." "I am," she said. Then, she went silent for several moments, looking at Aaron intently. As she studied him, a thoughtful expression came over her face. "I see why the others are so interested in you," she finally said. "Have a seat." Aaron sat down in one of the wooden chairs, then asked, "So why did you invite me?" "If Amaya and Stoneheart are interested in you, then so am I." "I only had a short conversation with Amaya," Aaron said. Hardly reason to think she's interested in me. A public conversation, Zaheva corrected him. At the governor's palace. For Amaya, that's as good as claiming you as her own. Aaron furrowed his brow in thought. He never would have expected that the single conversation he had with Amaya would draw such attention. If he had, he might have chosen to eat his meal in silence. Of course, if Amaya wants you, then Stoneheart cannot let her have you, Zaheva continued. And if Stoneheart wants you, then Amaya will not allow it. But I haven't even fought in the tournament yet, Aaron said. Why would they care? They hate each other, she answered plainly. Even if they weren't on opposing sides, they'd do all they could to hinder each other. With the current situation, they have plenty of opportunities to do so. Opposing sides? Aaron asked. Although he knew a little about the conflict, he was curious to hear what Zaheva's take on it would be. There's a minor disagreement within the Sixth Valley, Zaheva said. But for the time being, that's no concern of yours. What you should be worried about is what happens after you pick a side. And what would that be? Whichever of them you choose, the other will not accept it, she answered. And beyond the border, they will have plenty of chances to act on that. Even if you join someone else, you would risk offending both of them. Unless, of course, you choose someone with the ability to protect you. Someone like you. Zaheva's attempts to influence Aaron could hardly be called subtle, and he had long since figured out what her intentions were. Perhaps, she said, if you prove yourself in the tournament. Unlike Amaya and Stoneheart, I only recruit those who are worthy of joining the society. I suppose we'll find out in a few days, then, Aaron said, standing up from his chair. For now, I think I'll need to focus on my preparations. Thank you for the advice, and perhaps we'll meet again. I assume we will, Zaheva said, although she looked startled at Aaron's sudden move to depart. A few minutes later, Aaron once more found himself outside the mansion, and he breathed a sigh of relief at no longer having to suffer through Zaheva's clumsy attempts to win him to her side. If not completely useless, the meeting hadn't been particularly useful either. That there was bad blood between Stoneheart and Amaya was something Aaron had already gleaned from Stoneheart's comments the previous day, and that novices were eager to recruit strong fighters was plain as day. When Aaron returned to the governor's palace, Darkfire was still nowhere to be found. After a thought, Aaron asked a guard where to find the steward, then told the steward to inform Darkfire that they had urgent matters to discuss as soon as he returned. The steward looked somewhat irritated at being ordered around by a guest, but he did not complain, although the polished elegance of his voice did have a hint of annoyance to it when he agreed. Darkfire arrived some hours later, looking less weary than the last time Aaron had seen him. How did the meeting with Zaheva go? He asked as he entered Aaron's room. You know about that? Aaron asked, slightly puzzled that Darkfire knew about his activities. What? Did you think I spent these past few days in bed? Darkfire asked with an indignant look. Yes, Aaron replied honestly. That is exactly what I thought. Well, I suppose I did, Darkfire admitted. But I also attended a hideous number of banquets, dinners, brunches, and other gatherings. And while you were running in circles, I actually gathered some useful information. And what would that be? Aaron asked. For a start, you managed to get yourself entangled with the 3 most influential novices in the city, Darkfire said. Quite a feat, really. You could have fought 100 rounds in the arena wearing only a sock, and still drawn less attention to yourself. Chapter 90 Unexpected News. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The 3 most influential novices in the city. Aaron understood that Darkfire was talking about Amaya, Stoneheart, and Zaheva, although he was surprised to hear that Zaheva was included in the list. From what he had seen, she lacked both Stoneheart's power and Amaya's cunning. You know about the conflict in the Sixth Valley, right? Darkfire asked. I have, Aaron said. It's about the successor to the Patriarch, isn't it? Darkfire shook his head. It isn't. Or. It is, but it isn't. You've lost me, Aaron said. Is it or isn't it? Darkfire let out a frustrated sigh. It's complicated, he began. As Leanne tells it, who's Leanne? Aaron interrupted him. Darkfire raised an eyebrow. Leanne Tyrande. The governor's daughter. The girl I've been. I didn't tell you her name. You've barely said a word to me since we arrived at the palace, Aaron pointed out. But go on. Right, Darkfire said, his eyes once more narrowing with the effort of trying to remember the details. So, as Leanne tells it, the lands beyond the border have changed over the past decade, becoming far more dangerous than before. And rumors abound that things will get worse. Aaron nodded. So far, the story matched what he had heard. At the same time, Darkfire continued, the patriarch of the Sixth Valley has fallen ill, or maybe he's been gravely injured, or has died already. Nobody knows exactly what the truth is. But whatever the case, a successor is needed. So it's about the successor, then, Aaron said, wondering why Darkfire was struggling with such a simple story. No, let me finish. The patriarch himself doesn't matter. He's a figurehead more than anything, and his successor will be, too. Why would they be fighting over a figurehead? That's where it gets complicated, Darkfire said. There are several factions within the Sixth Valley, and he stopped mid-sentence, and his expression turned frustrated. You know what, forget it. I'm going to get Leanne. She's brilliant, she can tell you far more about this than I can. Before Aaron could respond, Darkfire was out the door, leaving Aaron behind in the empty room. When Darkfire returned a few minutes later, the governor's daughter, Leanne, Aaron reminded himself, was with him. She greeted Aaron with a friendly smile. Darkfire has told you about the situation, she asked. After a fashion, Aaron said. But it seems the factions are beyond his understanding. Darkfire scowled, but Leanne merely nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. It's complicated, she said. And although I hear many things from my father, there's much the Shadowflame Society doesn't discuss with outsiders. So what can you tell us? Aaron asked, eager to finally hear what was behind the Shadowflame novice's strange behavior. First, you need to understand the role of the Patriarch, she said. He's the leader of the Sixth Valley, but not its ruler, that role belongs to the elders. Then why is there a conflict over who succeeds him? Aaron asked. If he holds no real power, what does it matter who gets the title? It's about the factions behind him, Leanne explained. When a new patriarch is chosen, his allies also rise in power, because the patriarch is the one that decides who are allowed to become elders. And that's what the conflict is about, which faction will rule the Sixth Valley. With this, Aaron finally began to understand the situation. Which factions are there? And why are they fighting? That's a big question, Leanne said. There are many factions, dozens, if not more. But of those, there are three that truly matter. The Scorching Sun faction, the Waning Moon faction, and the Iron Mountain faction. And they disagree not just about who should be patriarch, but about the very future of the Sixth Valley. Aaron nodded thoughtfully, committing the three names to memory. What are their differences? Leanne hesitated before speaking. There's not enough time to explain all of it, she finally said. Not unless you have a week to spare. And even then, all I know I've heard from others, so I can't be certain how much of it is true. But with that said, she took a deep breath and a look of concentration appeared on her face. Then, she began to speak. The Scorching Sun faction believes that the Sixth Valley must grow, becoming larger and less dependent on the Empire. To accomplish this, they have begun recruiting large numbers of fighters. Their main support is the Naren family. You've already met one of their scions, Stoneheart. The Naren family is small but extremely powerful, yet their support within the society lies mostly with the valley's younger members. The Waning Moon faction agrees with the Scorching Sun faction that the Sixth Valley must change its path, but they believe that the valley should forge alliances within the Empire. Still, they have also begun to recruit more fighters, to compete with the Scorching Sun faction. Behind them stands the Tyr family, a large family that is almost as powerful as the Naren family. The novice you met at my father's gathering, Amaya, is one of them. Finally, the Iron Mountain faction belongs to the old Patriarch's allies and does not see a need for change, preferring to continue on the current path. Theirs is the largest faction by far, and they don't rely on the support of any single family. Yet with the troubles beyond the border getting worse every year, they've slowly been losing support. Zahava is a member of one of the more prominent families within the faction. As Lian finished speaking, Aaron took some moments to consider what she had just told him. It was a lot to take in, and he wanted to make sure he remembered it all. So if I get it right, he finally said, the Scorching Sun faction wants to recruit more fighters, the Waning Moon faction wants to strengthen ties with the Empire, and the Iron Mountain faction just wants things to stay the same. More or less, Lian replied, somewhat hesitantly. There's far more to it, but you could put it like that. Any suggestions on which we should choose? Aaron asked. Although he understood that he and Darkfire would ultimately have to make the decision, it couldn't hurt to get Lian's opinion. She clearly knew far more about these matters than they did. She shook her head. If you choose anyone who belongs to one of those factions, it means more than just who you'll face as a recruit. It will also determine which faction you'll be allied with once you return to the valley after a year. We'll have to make it through the year first, for that to matter. That's another problem, Lian said, her expression showing some worry. In the borderlands, there will be far more novices than here in Hillfort, and many of them will be allied with one of the factions. Regardless of who you choose, you can expect to have many enemies. What if we join a novice who isn't in any of the factions? Aaron asked. Lian hesitated before answering. I'm not sure. The rumors I've heard, though, say that many of the unaligned novices are forced to choose, either join, or die. They'd go that far. While he knew the matter was serious, Aaron still found it difficult to imagine that novices could kill each other without the valley's leaders intervening. They're fighting over the future of the Sixth Valley, Lian said. From what I've heard, there's little they wouldn't do. So it's a choice between either joining one of the factions and facing the other two, or joining none and facing all three, Aaron concluded glumly. He sighed deeply, then turned to Darkfire. What do you think? That is something else we must discuss, Darkfire said. Something important. What is it? The tournament. I'm not taking part. That might actually be a good idea, Aaron said. Avoid further attention, join some low-level novice, and be gone before the others arrive. But if we... The words died in Aaron's mouth as he looked at Darkfire and Lian, suddenly understanding the meaning of Darkfire's words. You're staying in Hillfort.